Imagine getting your first real paycheck. Not pocket money, not a small side job. The first paycheck that makes you feel like your life has finally started. You look at the number and immediately begin dividing it. Rent, food, a better phone, maybe nicer clothes. A weekend away. And because you're young, the future feels almost absurdly far away. Retirement belongs to another version of you. Investing sounds like something wealthy people do. Financial freedom is a phrase you hear online, but don't really feel. Then your income grows, and something strange happens. The money problem doesn't disappear. The apartment gets better. The car gets better. The restaurants get better. Your standards rise almost perfectly alongside your salary. 10 years later, you're earning an amount your younger self would have considered incredible. But you don't feel rich. You feel expensive. That is one of the strangest lessons about money. Earning more and becoming wealthier are not the same process. I wish someone had explained that distinction much earlier. Not because I think everyone needs to spend their 20s obsessing over retirement accounts or refusing to enjoy life. The opposite, actually. These 5 books made money feel less like a scoreboard and more like a tool for building a life. One changed how I think about financial behavior. Another made me calculate purchases in something more valuable than dollars. One pushed the question deeper into the patterns that create wealth. Another made investing feel far simpler than the financial industry often makes it sound. And the oldest book here contains advice so basic that modern people keep rediscovering it as though it were new. If I'd encountered these ideas earlier, I wouldn't necessarily have tried to make more money. I would have understood sooner what money was actually for. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money is where I would begin, because it destroys one of the most comforting myths about finance. That being smart should make you good with money. It doesn't. Imagine 2 people. One understands markets, economics, and financial theory. He follows every piece of financial news. He knows what interest rates are doing. He can explain valuations and economic cycles. But when markets fall sharply, he panics. The second person understands far less. She invests regularly, keeps her lifestyle manageable, avoids catastrophic debt, ignores most financial noise, and gives compounding decades to work. Who wins? Possibly the person who knows less. Because money is one of those areas where behavior can matter more than brilliance. That's what makes Housel's book worth your time. It doesn't treat financial success as a purely mathematical problem. It recognizes that your relationship with money is shaped by your history. Someone who grew up during economic instability may think about risk differently from someone who has only experienced prosperity. Someone raised around debt may interpret borrowing differently from someone whose parents feared it. 2 people can examine the same investment and reach opposite conclusions without either being irrational. They're looking through different histories. And then there is comparison. You see someone driving a $100,000 car. What do you actually know about that person? You know they have access to a $100,000 car. You don't know their net worth. You don't know the loan. You don't know their savings. You don't know whether buying it was effortless or financially reckless. We constantly observe consumption and mistake it for wealth because actual wealth is difficult to see. Money sitting in an investment account doesn't drive past you on the highway. That idea alone is worth remembering. But the psychology of money leaves us with another question. If money isn't primarily about displaying success, what is it actually buying? Your Money or Your Life by Vicki and Joe Dominguez offers one of the strongest answers I've found. Money buys things, but before money buys things, you exchange something for the money. Your life. Suppose you earn $25 an hour and see a $200 pair of shoes. The obvious calculation says the shoes cost $200. But another calculation says they cost 8 hours of work, and even that may be incomplete. You commute. You buy work clothes, you recover from stressful days. There are costs associated with earning. Suddenly, the question isn't simply, is this worth $200? It's, is this worth this portion of my life? That changes purchases. Not because spending becomes bad. Sometimes the answer should absolutely be yes. A dinner with people you love might be worth the hours. A flight to see your parents might be worth far more than the ticket price. A tool that saves you hundreds of hours might be cheap even if its price looks high. The point is to reconnect money with life. And that's why this book deserves its reading time. Most personal finance advice asks, how can you afford more? This book quietly asks, how much is enough? Those questions lead to very different lives. If you never define enough, every income eventually becomes insufficient. There is always a larger house, a better neighborhood, another status level, someone richer, someone younger and richer, someone on the internet apparently becoming rich while drinking coffee on a beach. Without an internal definition of enough, financial progress can become an escalator that never reaches a floor. But defining enough still doesn't explain why two people given similar opportunities can build completely different financial lives. That takes us deeper. DNA of Wealth by Phon Piseth approaches money through the patterns beneath financial outcomes. Imagine three siblings receiving the same $20,000 inheritance. The first thinks, finally, I can upgrade my life. New car, travel, clothes. The second thinks, I need to protect this. The money remains untouched. The third asks, what could this become? Perhaps part goes into investments. Perhaps some funds education or a business. Perhaps a portion stays liquid for security. $20,000 entered three lives. But psychologically, it wasn't the same $20,000. Each person interpreted the money through a different internal framework. That's the territory that makes DNA of Wealth relevant here. We tend to search for wealth outside ourselves, the right investment, the right business, the right property, the right opportunity. Those things matter. IB comedies eventually pass through the decision-making architecture of the person holding them. Give an impatient person a long-term investment and patience becomes the problem. Give someone obsessed with status a higher income and lifestyle inflation may absorb it. Give a frightened person an opportunity and excessive caution may prevent action. Give an overconfident person capital and risk can become invisible. Financial outcomes aren't created by mindset alone, of course. Income, opportunity, education, institutions, luck and circumstance matter enormously. But within what we can control, repeated patterns matter. That's why this book is worth considering if you're less interested in another list of financial listing tactics and more interested in the person making the financial decisions. Because eventually, every strategy encounters character. And once you begin thinking that way, another financial industry assumption becomes questionable. Maybe investing doesn't need to be as complicated as it looks. J.L. Collins's The Simple Path to Wealth is powerful, partly because of what it removes. Imagine someone deciding to start investing. They search online. Within 20 minutes, they encounter individual stocks, options, cryptocurrencies, real estate, commodities, market timing, technical analysis, dividend strategies, economic forecasts, portfolio optimization, and thousands of people confidently explaining why everyone else is wrong. The beginner entered looking for a way to invest. They leave needing a lie down. Complexity has a strange psychological effect. It can make us assume sophistication equals effectiveness. Collins pushes in the opposite direction. His broad philosophy emphasizes keeping things simple, controlling expenses, avoiding unnecessary debt, and using low-cost broad market index investing as a long-term wealth-building approach. The exact implementation depends on your country, taxes, financial system, risk tolerance, and circumstances. So this isn't a universal instruction manual. The more important lesson is conceptual. A financial system should be simple enough that you can actually live with it. Imagine two investors. One spends 5 hours every week trying to identify the perfect opportunity. The other builds a diversified, long-term approach and spends those 5 hours living. If the second person can achieve their goals without constantly predicting markets, simplicity has created something beyond investment returns. It has returned attention. That's what makes this book worth reading. The financial industry often profits from activity. Your life may benefit from needing less of it. And perhaps that is the point where an ancient book becomes surprisingly modern. The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason delivers financial lessons through parables set in ancient Babylon. The language and setting belong to another world. The central problem doesn't. People earn money. Then, the money disappears. One of the book's enduring principles is essentially to keep a portion of what you earn. Obvious, completely. Common, not nearly enough. Imagine earning $3,000 every month. You tell yourself you'll save whatever remains at the end. But money is extraordinarily talented at finding jobs. Rent needs some. Food needs some. Subscriptions take their little pieces. Friends suggest dinner. Something breaks. Something goes on sale. You deserve something. The month ends. Nothing remains. So you try again next month. Clason reverses the logic. Don't make your future compete for leftovers. Give it a claim on your income before your lifestyle consumes everything. What makes this book worth reading isn't sophistication. It's the opposite. Modern finance can become so complicated that we overlook foundational behaviors. If you cannot consistently keep part of what you earn, debating sophisticated investments is premature. You need something to invest first. And now these 5 books begin connecting in an interesting way. Housel tells us that money is behavioral. Robin and Dominguez remind us that money represents pieces of our lives. DNA of Wealth turns attention toward the internal patterns repeatedly shaping financial choices. Collins argues that building wealth doesn't necessarily require endless financial complexity. Clason returns us to the primitive foundation beneath everything. Keep some of what comes through your hands. Put these ideas together, and the question changes. Instead of asking, "How do I get rich?" you begin asking, "What kind of relationship with money would make my life better even before I become rich?" That's a much more useful question. Maybe you stop buying things primarily because you want other people to notice them. Maybe you create a financial buffer large enough that losing a job becomes a problem rather than a catastrophe. Maybe you automate investing. Maybe you stop checking markets 12 times a day. Maybe you decide what enough means before your lifestyle decides for you. Maybe you spend more freely on the few things that genuinely improve your life and far less on things you barely care about. And maybe, eventually, money begins giving you something far more valuable than expensive objects. The ability to say no. No to work that violates your values. No to debt you don't need. No to pretending. No to staying somewhere solely because missing one paycheck would destroy you. No to opportunities that aren't right. That is a kind of wealth we don't photograph very well. There is no luxury logo for having 6 months of living expenses available. Nobody at a traffic light knows your investments are growing. Financial independence can look remarkably ordinary from the outside. But inside a person's life, it can change everything. If I were starting again, I wouldn't read these 5 books because I expected them to reveal a secret investment. I'd read them because they attack 5 mistakes early enough to matter. Thinking intelligence automatically creates financial wisdom. Forgetting that money costs life to earn. Ignoring the internal patterns behind repeated decisions. Confusing complexity with sophistication. And waiting until the end of the month to build the future. If behavior around money confuses you, begin with the psychology of money. If you're earning and spending without knowing what any of it is ultimately for, your money or your life asks the harder question. If you're interested in the deeper architecture behind wealth-building behavior, DNA of Wealth belongs in that conversation. If investing feels impossibly complicated, the simple path to wealth may help clear the noise. And if you need the foundation stripped back to something almost impossible to misunderstand, spend an evening in ancient Babylon. Because I don't think the greatest advantage of learning about money early is having more years to become rich. It's having more years to avoid building a life that requires you to keep getting richer just to maintain it. The younger you understand that, the more time money has to compound. But more importantly, the more time freedom has to compound with it.